There is no clear path to med school in the military until now. If you're watching this, likely you want to get to medical school. Maybe you even want to become a military physician. Good news. In this video, I'm sitting down with the developer of the brand new ROTC Medical Core Scholar Program Guide to give you the roadmap we've all been waiting for. We're going to discuss all of this. Yes, what you see on screen right here. And if you're looking for specific topics we discuss, please check the description below. This is only possible because of the tireless work and generous help of Lieutenant Colonel and Medical Doctor Mary Alice Noel, the Medical Corps Recruiting Integration Officer. Dr. Noel, it's so good to have you back. It's been incredible to see that 6 months ago, this med school guide was still just an idea when I first had a discussion with you. And now it's an approved reality.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
So starting off, I think we all see that this guide is 30 pages. For those of you who are watching this and don't even know what guide I'm talking about, this is it. It's this amazing thing right here. And it starts out with an introduction. And the introduction introduces the purpose. And so I think I want to start out just saying what the purpose and overall plan for this guide is. Why is it needed? What's the Army changing in terms of its mission for pre-med cadets? Specifically, this targets ROTC pre-med cadets. And where are we moving from here? This is exciting.
Yes. Well, so in fiscal year 2027, which will start in October 2026, the Army has missioned the Reserve Officer Training Corps, the ROTC, to produce 25 pre-med cadets. And that is really what has changed. That's created the emphasis and desire for us to make sure that the cadets who are desiring to go to medical school out of ROTC have a path and have a clear layout of what they need to do and accomplish in those short 3 years, maybe 4, but often 3, that they have to prepare their medical school applications, because it is a challenging process. It is very competitive. And ROTC cadets make fantastic doctors because you've already done a lot of hard things in college. You've chosen to do a path that most don't choose. And that's going to set you up for the rigors of medical school, for residency, and then your profession as a physician. And so this guide was really to fill a gap, a void that existed where if you went to your professor of military science and said, I want to go to medical school, they probably didn't know how to help you. And if you went to your health advisor at your university, you said, I want to go to medical school, but maybe I am not really able to take a gap year, they may not know how to help you either. Or they might be encouraging you to take a gap year and you don't know how you're going to do that with ROTC. And so this just allows people to see what they need to do and accomplish in their first 3 years or 4 years of college in order to maximize their potential for getting in. If they're utilizing the Ed Delay program, which is what the ROTC uses this program to allow or permit cadets to, they commission, but then they go into an inactive reserve component when they're in a health profession scholarship program. And that's for medical school, dental school, veterinary school, lawyers, chaplains. So this Ed Delay program encompasses all of those, but the application is in your senior year and the board meets this year. I believe it's 20 September. So it's really important to make sure you understand this full timeline. Well, that's why I used this guide that was written for West Point cadets by Dr. Alan Beitler, who is their pre-health advisor at West Point. I used it to adapt to ROTC and the specifics for the ROTC program.
Yeah, that's incredible. And really quick, if you're concerned that this video is not for you because you're not in ROTC or you're not West Point, some service academy, I want you to stop and think. Right now, you mentioned how only 40 and 50% of people say you choose the Army Med School or military med school is prior service, right?
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
Like a
so there are
massive segment of just civilians.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who, if you're listening to this and you're not in the military, I think it has some valuable information as well for you as you're looking to potentially utilize the health profession scholarship program, which covers your full tuition for any accredited school in the US or Puerto Rico. You get a monthly stipend of this year, it's $3,000 a month. You're getting a $20,000 signing bonus. And then you're also getting access to the military match, which has 85% match to specialty of choice rate for the Army.
Incredible.
There's just a lot of great opportunities with HPSP. So if you're not ROTC or a West Point cadet or anything like that, this still hopefully will be helpful for you.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to put numbers to an idea. In 2024, a data stat I looked at had 250,000 college freshmen declared that they were pre-med. And then by the time they actually went to apply, the number was about 53,000. And then the number that got accepted, 23,156 to a U.S. medical school. And so that might sound daunting, might sound overwhelming, but this guide, I think, makes leaps and bounds in helping navigate that journey. Something that I was kind of floundering around in the water, hoping for people to know where to point me next, because this thing like ed delay, HPSP, for me, I had to do an extension of benefits as well because I have an extra semester in undergraduate studies. And all of these are like, okay, there's documentation. The Army loves paperwork. How do I make sure I stay on top of it? We're going to get into the intensities of the MCAT, your other pre-med curriculum, everything that's going to help build a robust medical school application. And yeah, I think if you still are having doubts about checking out this guide, please just do it right now. We're going to leave it linked. Dr. Noel is going to get it published in more publication sites, and it's going to get out there. But yeah, so just to start out, then I think it's valuable to just share a little bit about where mission came in terms of this, because I know we discussed it in a previous video, but you are both a doctor and an Army officer. And so what's the story that led you to actually adapt this guide from West Point and make it specific for ROTC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my background is I went to West Point for undergrad. So I definitely understand the pull and the strain of trying to get your application ready while you're doing a intensive cadet curriculum. And then I went to the Uniformed Services University for my medical school. I chose family medicine because it allowed me to do everything that I loved in my clerkship rotations. And I trained down at Fort Benning, Georgia. I've had a really robust career in the sense of I've had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things. And one of the things I love about family medicine, because you can do a lot of different types of jobs. So I've been on the operational side. I spent a majority of my career in academics working at a residency program. And then I've also been in clinical leadership. But now my role in the Army is kind of a niche role where I work directly with the medical recruiters who are Army enlisted and officers who go out and talk to pre-med students about the Health Profession Scholarship Program, joining up into the Army to serve in the AMEDD, the Medical Corps, or the Medical Service Corps or Specialty Corps. And so with this job that I just started last summer, so I've been in the job not even fully a year, I came across, and I believe it October, November timeframe is when the Army G1, so the personnel people at the very top of the Army, did an analysis and determined that there are not enough physicians in the Army right now, especially as we look towards potential conflicts with major countries who have very robust military capabilities like Russia or China. And so with that, they saw the need to increase the number of physicians in the Army. And so that has come through three ways. One, they have given the mission to ROTC to start producing pre-med cadets. Two is that they increase the number of West Point cadets that can go to medical school from 2% to 3% of the class. And third is they are each year increasing the number of Health Profession Scholarship Program recipients that we offer. So when I came in, for fiscal year 24, the goal was 315. This year it's 340. I believe next year it's 360. So we are increasing the number of scholarships we're also offering to get more people into the Army, taking advantage of getting medical school paid for, and then also getting a chance to have a really neat career that you owe a certain amount of time for. For HPSP, you owe 4 years after completion of residency, which isn't, when you're looking at the span of your career, it's going to be maybe a third into your career, and you still have 2/3 left to complete. So I think it's just a great stepping point off for people to really hone their skills and get some great training and get some great experiences, and then can enter into the civilian world after that if they want to.
For sure. Yeah, if you want inspiration, go check out War Docs, because Dr. Noel actually let me know about it. Congrats, you're on it recently. I got to listen to that one with the other branches. But yes, if you hear some of those doctor stories who are military, were military now, and see the impact they've had on our lives, and most aren't even aware, it's incredible. So yeah, go check out War Docs, phenomenal podcast. But yeah, so that's cool. I didn't know about the increase in HPSP scholarships. When I first was interested and learned about it, I think there's about 270 Army ones. So now to see that, that's almost 100 increase with that. Yeah, wow. And then are there now systems and support in place to actually get that 25 number for pre-med cadets from our ROTC, or is this more of an informal agreement with med schools? How's this being developed?
Yeah, so with Cadet Command, I think there's not been a formal op order published yet, but that is coming. And so this Medical Corps Scholar Program is the program where I believe there is now capability to identify pre-med cadets in CSIMS, which is the online program that's similar to nursing. So they can identify who is a nurse. And so I've heard that there's also a way to identify pre-med cadets and CSIMs. It's not as simple as choosing your, which cadet has a certain major, because you could do anything and still apply to medical school as long as you're getting the right prerequisites. You could be a philosophy
Right.
major and still do your science classes and go to medical school. So we're working on identifying those people. We're also looking at in the off order that's going to be published for next year's CST, making sure the cadet summer training, making sure that we have an avenue to get cadets who are trying to apply to medical school, getting into the first or second regiment. I think that's really going to provide them an opportunity to fill out their secondaries. That comes with the implication that you've taken your MCAT, you've applied to AMCAS before you leave for CST, and then you're pre-writing some of your secondaries to fire off as soon as you complete CST, which is 35 days of intensity and no phone and no computer. So you're not doing your secondaries while you're at CST.
Yeah,
So
let's hope
there's
not.
all of that is kind of getting formalized, if you will, to support these cadets as they're pursuing the pre-med path. I'm doing a lot of education with the professors of military science and the recruiting operations officers. So I've had a lot of platforms in which I'm getting to brief them, and more so in the coming year, so that they have my point of contact. I can talk to cadets who are looking at this route and making sure that they are set up for success.
Yeah, amazing. And since you talk to so many pre-med students, civilians, etc., have there been a lot of gaps or misconceptions you've seen that you wanted to correct with this guide specifically? And just kind of surface level, we'll probably get into more detail later.
Yeah. I think for the ROTC cadets specifically, I have had some very sad stories. I've talked to cadets, I've talked to the cadets and their parents about they just didn't understand the timeline that the AMCAS applications open right at the end of May, over a year before you would actually start medical school. And so it is rolling admissions, meaning that the students who are putting in their applications on the 28th of May are going to be the first to receive secondary applications, and then they're going to be the first to get interviews. And so if you're waiting to submit your application until August, you are behind the boat. And I am a personal recipient of that pain, because I, as a cadet, did not apply until September of my first year. That's the senior year at West Point, because I had leadership positions and life was going on, and I just really didn't understand that. So I'm really wanting to emphasize that, knowing that you are going to need to put in your application as soon as you possibly can, and preparing for that by preparing your classes the right way, anticipating the needs for ROTC, again, cadet summer training, really understanding that timeline and the concept of rolling admissions. It's not like college. They're going to fill seats with qualified applicants as they get them. So that is a huge part that I really want to make sure that people know. The second part is just understanding how much time you need to prepare for the MCAT. The MCAT is not the ACT. It's not the SAT. It is not something you can just study for on the weekends, throw a couple hours in here and there, and then expect to get an excellent score. I've talked to a few cadets at this point who have not even gotten scores high enough to even try to apply to medical school. And because you're in this ROTC program, that sticks you into this situation where, what's next? How are you going to get to medical school? But you also still have to commission as a second lieutenant in the reserves or in active duty. So I think understanding that the MCAT, the recommendation from the guide, and that all is pulled from the AAMC, who kind of creates the MCAT, administers the MCAT. It's important to understand 240 hours of dedicated studying is very important. And I firmly believe that using some type of structured guide, that even though it might cost you a few $1,000s, you're going to get that money back. If you take the HPSP scholarship, you're going to get $20,000 of a bonus, right? So think about if it allows you to get into medical school, you have to get there first. You have to do well enough in your MCAT to get accepted to medical school, because no matter how many extracurricular activities you have or how amazing you've done, if you're an EMT and a scribe and a CNA and you're an ROTC cadet, it doesn't matter how many extracurriculars you have. If you can't demonstrate your ability to do well on a standardized exam, our lives as physicians are taking standardized exams. Like, I literally have to take another 25 questions that are standardized test questions to maintain my certification for family medicine. And they've actually changed from doing a one-day exam every 10 years to just these quarterly questions. Like, we are professional test takers, and the way you show medical schools that you'll be good at passing your step 1, step 2, COMLEX 1, COMLEX 2 is by doing well on the MCAT.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the biggest regrets I currently face in mine. I placed about 70th percentile MCAT. My mission was to do it as cheap as possible to show students that there is a way. I spent a total of $485, I believe, with it, doing practice exams. There's different philosophies of how to take the MCAT. If you're really self-motivated, you can kind of do a more of a generalized format structure and follow that yourself. I got to experiment from my peers of the Princeton Review, Kaplan, and other more structured video lectures with questions at the end of each chapter that ensured you actually are learning and retaining the information. But yes, it is something very important. We'll probably discuss it later, but 500 is the minimum score to even have a chance at the HPSP. That's putting you at 50th percentile, and then section scores of 124 or higher. But yeah, it is very important. I spent just over 200 hours I recorded, and even I had an extra semester to study. I didn't have to worry about it during CST, but you're right, those leadership roles, I was the executive officer, I was PAO, other things, life gets in the way. So I really want you to take time, backwards plan, as we say in the Army. Really, how long is that going to take to get to where you want to be? Yeah, that's huge advice. But then I want to switch then more into the actual behind the scenes. And so is there a section of this 30-page guide that you're most proud of that you think is overlooked? I know the visual timelines are key. I've been trying to develop one of these for other pre-med cadets. I'm like, this is insane. I don't know if I'm doing this right. So it just really helps to have a verified, approved timeline and different graphics in here that help that process.
Yeah, I think the graphics are really helpful. I think it's helpful to understand the guide breaks down freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, the MCAT prep process. And so while it's long, I think, taking it and digesting it in sections is helpful. And the earlier you can get your hands on it, the better. If you're a high school student thinking about going to medical school, it's good to look at that now, because it's really about how you're structuring your classes over your first, second, third year to be prepared to apply to medical school. And I think we talked about this on the last show, like, should we send all the pre-med cadets between sophomore and junior year? Or should, and I think it's not a one size fits all. I think it's what you want. And so, and actually just, I was at the First Regiment CST Ed Delay briefing last week, and I met a cadet who was between her sophomore and junior year, and she had structured her curriculum to be able to be successful at CST, take the right classes, so she could do CST now and then focus on doing her application the next summer. At the same time, she's not doing shadowing hours right now. She's not doing research. And so it's really, what people want to make of their experience. But there are some of those options if you start early enough to go to CST a summer earlier, like some of the nursing students do. And so it's important to just realize that there's a section for everybody, every kind of place that you are in the process. The timelines, again, the graphics, I'm a very visual person, so it was helpful that Dr. Beitler had created these timelines and given me the PowerPoints to edit them. I think the obligation timeline too is helpful to understand about how much time you're going to owe, because you're going to, if you do HPSP, you owe that 4 years for HPSP, and then you serve back your 4 years for ROTC. And so that's 8 years after residency, which, while that seems like a really long time, one, it goes by really fast. And two, I think it just, if you're committed to being an ROTC, being an Army physician is a great job. I right. couldn't have chosen a better job for my career in serving America's men and women and family members, and getting to take care of them day in and day out. Like it's just been a real privilege to get to care for them, and I've loved that. So it's a long time. I have children. I've got married. Like, I have a life. I don't really have a life because my kids are in travel soccer. Like we're making it work, and you can be a military physician and also achieve some of your other life goals, I guess is what I would say.
Really quick, if you find this video or this cartwheel interesting, then please consider subscribing. Back to the video.
Yeah, that's great. Because I broke it down 22 sections in this guide, and I'll try to throw them up on screen here. But as you see, it walks you through amazingly. I think starts out with the AAMC core competencies. This is something, if you're, say, a freshman, sophomore in college, even if you're still in high school, go look out the 17 pre-med competencies on the AAMC website, and your whole work and activities section of your med school application, the MCAS, can be specifically constructed around those competencies. This is a key that I wish I knew sooner. I mentioned it in this other video that I just made about the harsh truths about pre-med in 2025, but in that I think, yes, they're very undervalued, and being able to take your ROTC leadership and hard challenges we face and being able to then overlay it with those competencies is what gives, I think, undoubtedly ROTC cadets a huge step up and an advantage in this process when we aren't always going to be that 24 and a half average matriculant age of med school matriculants, because we can't take a gap year if you're pursuing the HPSP and have ROTC obligations. And with maybe a caveat there. Did I say that right this time?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're wanting to do ed delay and complete 4 years, like you have to do ed delay to get to go into HPSP immediately following your completion of college. That makes sense. And then again, there are some options for a gap year, but you are going to be a reserve officer then trying to get into medical school. And so that's not ed delay. That's you going through the reserves get released in order to take advantage of the HPSP. And I'm working to clarify that and have a process map for that as well, because I'm still trying to understand it, but I have a point of contact now at reserve branch, at the reserve component that does that actual processing for people.
Yeah. And so for those of you following along, if you go to 26 of the guide, there's actually 2 cadets in my program who ended up having that Minuteman scholarship. So out of high school, they applied for that guaranteed reserve force duty contract. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Every recruiter that they've talked to has said it's really difficult. One wants to go to dental school, one wants to go to medical school, and it's a challenge. They're also
essentially
cadets. Yeah.
You have to revoke that. Like you have to revoke your GFRD scholarship. So I think that's important. Again, if you're listening to this and you get offered a GFRD, the Guaranteed Force Reserve, there's a specific stipulation in the Ed Delay Circular, which is the regulation that Cadet Command publishes every year, that you cannot apply for Ed Delay if you are a GRFD scholar. And so that is just important to know. There is a way to get out of it, but once you have commissioned as GRFD, my understanding is that it's very challenging to get then released to get to take advantage of HPSP. So pay attention to what you sign and ask those questions. And if people don't know, keep asking questions to other people to get a firm answer.
And then for those of us later in the process, the TBB interviews, I think it was mentioned we need to put it as first priority, that Ed delay. Is that correct?
Oh, right. So when you're going in and putting your branches, right? Like, so you list Ed delay and then you put active or reserve components. And again, I think it depends on what you want, is if you're going to put active or reserve, because that's if you do not get selected for medical school, will you commission active duty or will you commission as the reserves? Okay. And they're going to try to abide by those preferences. So the challenges, and it's just a reality. And I got to attend the excellent Ed delay brief last week and the branching brief to hear and understand further. There are people who can BRADSO, and they're going to get a chunk of those spots. And so you might be off the charts on all your scoring. If for whatever reason you don't get into medical school, you have a limited, if you don't BRADSO, which I wouldn't recommend doing that, because you're already thinking about committing a lot of time.
Go combat arms.
Yeah, right. And so if you, there's just limited slots. And so those slots, by the time you might get selected for Ed delay, but don't get into medical school, they're going back and finding open slots for you on active duty if you choose active duty. Not that it's impossible to continue pursuing medical school and making it through as an ordnance officer or as a signal officer or MI, whatever that might be. There's still a way you can go to medical school. It's just going to be potentially a little more challenging. But again, I'm here to walk through that with people. I mean, I'm in this job for 2 more years, so I do 30-minute appointments with cadets and talk to people about different, avenues that they could take. And it's going to be so dependent on what each individual person's circumstances are. Because it's, you're getting paid really well as a second lieutenant on active duty, as opposed to doing reserves.
And so, if you have any specific questions you want, Dr. Noel has offered her email. We'll leave it in the description. But anything a little more niche, or there's so many different paths. That's what makes it both beautiful and awful to be able to navigate.
Yes.
So, that's true. But then advancing towards the 4-year plan. So this guide has from freshman to senior year. Starting with freshman year, it kind of just has the overview of what your kind of entails and mentions the 104R. This is something I wish my 104R advisor, as well as my academic major specific advisor, knew better, because they ended up missing 2 core requirements to graduate. That is the reason I'm now here for another semester. So I'm going 4.5 years at Carroll College, or else I'd have to take 28 credits in a single semester, which I was like, no, thank you.
No.
So luckily the Army understood my dilemma and they ended up approving that extension of benefits. But yeah, just having that robust plan, even if you're not type A, and if you are type A, good for you, because you almost need to be for this plan, but really have someone look over your 104R. If you're at a college or university that ends up having you with some sort of general major advisor until you declare your major, if you're pre-med, find a pre-med biology, biochemistry, someone, or even like a chair of a department to look over your schedule with you, because they will have the most up-to-date and approved advice on how your plan should look to make sure you graduate in that time that you want to.
Can I caveat on that too, is that it's really like the MCAT, and it's been a long time since I took the MCAT, but I knew that my pre-med major allowed me to take organic chemistry and all these things that you need for the MCAT, right? And so it's really hard to study for some of those courses for the MCAT if you have not had them. And so that's another thing, is like, oh, I'll just take Orgo 2 at the end of my senior year. Like, no, like you should probably take it before you take the MCAT, or at least be in a majority of it by the time you take your MCAT. Because we recommend taking the MCAT in March or April of your junior year is probably the most ideal time, because you'll have gotten your score back. You know what your score is as you're applying to medical schools. It helps you to kind of like figure out that tiering of who you're applying to, because it costs money to apply to the schools. That's broken down in the guide too. But you should have some reach schools. You should have some, schools you want, and then some schools that are kind of like a guarantee based on like your scoring or GPA. So having all that objective information as you're applying for medical school is really helpful to have. But making sure you have those really important curriculum, the curriculum lined out so that you can be as successful for your MCAT as possible too is one part of that 104R that you need to get completed.
Yeah, thank you. That is huge. That MCAT, the different sections, 4 major sections, but a lot of subsections: physics, biochemistry, organic chemistry, albeit small, is still an important section, and all the others. Yeah, that's good. Also, little side note there, start reading academic journals, because the MCAT is going to very heavily focus on you being able to digest quickly academic journals and research articles. So if you have experience reading those, that will give you a huge leg up, even if you don't have all the memory advice or have taken those classes. So then sophomore year, junior year, senior year kind of goes into other focuses. Junior year, of course, that big CST focus for most cadets. Again, it's variable. Some could take it sooner. There's a quick timeline here. This is really helpful on page 9. So it kind of breaks down each month of your junior year and when you should really solicit those letters of recommendation, your MCAT preparation, how you should continue classes, shadowing research, and then when you should take that MCATs, like Dr. Noel just mentioned. So yeah, check out these timelines. Just so helpful. I wish I had this 2 years ago. Is there anything for the years that you'd like to mention before we switch into MCAT talk?
I think just knowing that ROTC is going to give you a lot of experiences, even if you think they are minor. Any leadership role you're given, even if that's to stock the supply closet or obtain supplies during a training, whatever that looks like, try to make sure that you're conveying the responsibility you've been given, what you did with that responsibility, the impact it had. If you planned training for, 40 cadets to, do a 4-hour, be very specific and lay all that out. It also helps you start learning how to write your OERs in the future, your officer evaluation reports. But it really helps you just make sure you're capturing those experiences so you can put that into your AMCAS application, because there are multiple sections in your work activities section that you can talk about ROTC. ROTC should not just be one, it should be multiple areas of your application. So don't discount the things you're doing for ROTC. And then the other thing is just trying to get in those exposures to clinical experiences through shadowing. If you can scribe in the summer, if you can do work as an EMT or a CNA. I've heard so many different, I've just talked to someone who's going to do a behavioral health tech position. Those are all great experiences. And also it helps you decide, like, am I sure I want to get into this? Because you're getting to see reality and humanity of people when you're doing some of those really tough frontline jobs. And so whatever you can do to make your experiences between your freshman and sophomore year and sophomore and junior year, make those experiences as robust as possible with shadowing. And I'll use that time to plug that we have set up an Operation Whitecoat, which is a shadowing experience at Walter Reed, currently not an internship with ROTC. So it's self-funded right now, But again, you can reach out to me if you're interested in shadowing at Walter Reed next summer. Then we've got a way for you to do that. And then we're also working to establish some locations at San Antonio, maybe at Madigan over the next year, so that you do get some of those military medicine shadowing experiences. And it also sets you up for, even while you're in med school, you'll have some of those connections now built to reach out to while you're doing medical school.
Yeah, that's amazing. Operation White Coat. Go check that out. Sounds amazing. But yeah, this is my AMCAS. So it is a good 18 pages of fun in quotations. But yeah, that work and activity section, they give you 15 options of just basically everything under the sun that you can mention. And yeah, all three of my most significant experiences. So you have 700 characters max for most, and then you have three that are most significant, that you have 1325 characters to be able to write out. And I think I put my medical internship actually at Moncrief as one of the most significant. Put my experiences of ROTC kind of generalized over the 4 years, both specific stories of leading 130 cadets at our joint FTX, what that taught for leadership. And then my Operation 22 veteran suicide awareness campaign that I created. In a unique way, I never would have thought, but ROTC became kind of the whole focus and direction of this entire application, which I find incredible, because freshman year I would have never thought that'd be the case. Yeah. So it is true. Don't underestimate your time in just learning that all. So going through the years and then into the MCAT. So I think finally it's time we release the beast and just have the common pitfalls and what makes a strong applicant to med school. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned one of the biggest mistakes you've been seeing from cadets and others you've talked to is just not realizing the timeline, and then not realizing that applying to med school is very different from colleges, and then the MCAT time intensity. Mm-hmm. So are there any other big mistakes you think, like red sign, glaring, like stop this now, or do you want to focus more on one of those?
Yeah, I'm just not going to overemphasize enough how important it is to, one, understand the timeline, like I said earlier, as well as making sure you have dedicated your time to studying for the MCAT and preparing for that. You can take the MCAT more than once, but again, because if you're an ROTC cadet, you have limited amount of time. And so if you do not do as well as you think you did, depending on how you perform, you may not have as much time to retake it in the next 2 or 3 months. And so I've just come across people who have said, I just didn't put in the amount of time that I thought I needed to study, and I'm going to take it again. But then that's delaying their application process. It's maybe delaying even their opportunity to apply for Ed Delay or be successful being selected for Ed Delay. And so that is really important to, again, look at your timing, look at your courses, make sure that you have created space to study for the MCAT and prepare for that. It's not a simple test, and that's on purpose, right? And it's written in such a way that you have to also learn how you take tests, and are you a good test taker, and are there things that you can improve just in your test taking skills that will set you up for success in the future, again, because you're a professional test taker as a doctor. So I think that's really what I want to emphasize, is that and people say, oh, it's not all about the score, but that's going to be some of the first differentiating factors that schools are going to look at, because they're going to have thousands and thousands of applications to sift through. So people are going to have a higher MCAT, higher GPA, are going to get shuffled into that pile, that are going to get the, secondary. Most schools will send out everybody who applies, they will send out a secondary, but as they're looking to who are they going to interview and what time slot, that's really, you might get it put in that's a good enough score, but we're going to look at these people first, and then we'll take a look at you. It may vary depending on the school and their philosophies, but that's just kind of an overarching rule, is that if you send a score of a 500 to a school that has an average of 511 or 512, right? Like that's just challenging to be on that end of the bell curve for that school and get accepted.
For sure. And then for those of us from Montana, like myself, with no in-state schools, we have WWAMI and the WICHE program, so University of Washington and Oregon Health Sciences, to treat us as in-state. But it's good to recognize and use MSAR. I love the guide mentions MSAR. Yeah. I spent so many hours there just breaking down all the data. It provides amazing, concise and organized information on each of the major MD schools, as well as just so many data points. So go have a great time on that platform. It's, I believe, $28 a year for that subscription. Highly worth it. And that's how I ended up just whittling down to 13 schools that I applied. I know the guide recommends 15 to 20. Being from Montana and knowing that I don't want to probably filled a lot of secondaries that I have like no chance of getting into schools. I was like 13 seems at least reachable. But yeah, so very case dependent. There's such an inundation of medical content now of do this to get accepted in med school.
Yeah, right.
So with everyone, it's like you take it a grain of salt. We're trying to provide what we've seen and what we've learned. It's incomplete knowledge, but I think if you don't overcomplicate it, don't overwhelm yourself, just break things up into little chunks, because we often overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 4. And this is a long process. I don't think you should underestimate yourself and what you can accomplish in that time. That's really helpful. Just, the MCAT section, I think, speaks for itself in the guide. I don't think we need to just delay and really kick a dead horse. But the other point I wanted to mention was the expansion of that ROTC-Friendly Med School list. So that was something that I was reaching out to deans of admission and other people at schools. And so if I can find it here, we will see, I believe it's on page 26. Yes, it is.
Yep.
There's now over, looks like about 10 MD schools plus, more like 12 to 14, and then 7 DO schools that we have here, including multiple campuses. So this, just simple, going down the list, like Texas A&M, NeoMed, both of which I applied to, University of Louisville, great, Vanderbilt, Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, even some of the Ivies, and then DO schools, Virginia College of Osteopathic Medicine, Rocky Vista, there's a Montana campus, Lake Erie, California, New York, Orlando. So this is amazing because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've talked to people specifically from these schools and they've either said it's in their mission statement or what does it mean to be an ROTC-friendly med school?
Right. So, I mean, I think it's and some of these schools are given to me by other admissions counselors, pre-health advisors, USU, right? Like they just have an understanding of the different schools. So this doesn't mean that you can have a lower than average score and get in, and there's never a guarantee. But these are some schools that recognize the value of ROTC and appreciate what both the ROTC and health profession scholarship community brings to their classes, because people who have done ROTC, people who are pursuing the health profession scholarship program have a dedication already demonstrated because they signed a dotted line to serving their country and to doing something bigger than themselves. And so I think that the aspect of that they appreciate that the military, what military medicine brings to the table for medicine globally, and the research that's come out of military medicine and the contributions that military physicians make and the positions that military physicians hold in leadership for a lot of these different specialty organizations. It's just, they acknowledge that and value that. So it's schools that are going to see ROTC in the application and not have, and have an understanding of what that involves some commitment on your part. Certainly some of the DO schools, some of the MD and DO schools I have personally spoken to, we've had a conversation. The applicant needs to be competitive for what that school looks like on the MSTAR, right? So look at their MCAT averages, look at their GPA averages, but I would recommend, thinking about some of these schools, exploring the schools. And some of the DO schools have military medicine specific honors tracks where you're going to get exposure to military medicine. And I know at Texas A&M, they have a military medicine department. And so they're going to do their best to try to expose you to some of the aspects of military medicine. And a lot of the people in the faculty are either retired colonels or served before. And so some really great schools that has some emphasis on military medicine. At NeoMed, they have a lounge that's just for people who are serving or who have served. And a lot of their school leadership have served in the military before. And so like I said, it's important to look into some of these schools. And I know that there are more out there, but I'm one person and working to develop those connections over the next year. So I anticipate this list expanding over the next year as I meet and engage with, deans of admission and admissions departments and finance departments and kind of find out, what the school's understandings are about ROTC and HPSP.
Yeah. And something that is aligned with that is the residency process. Since we're all required to military match, if you're on the HPSP, then it's really helpful to know you're at a school which recognizes the differences of that process for applying to residency when you're military. And so like I'll be having a discussion soon with Dr. Suter, someone that Dr. Noel pointed me to, and he currently serves on the board of a Texas med school. He's been in both the MD and DO worlds, and his specific focus, he said, is to help that residency process to make sure that the, HPSP recipients that he works with have the best shot of getting into the residency that they desire.
Yes.
And so that's a unique
I just realized
advantage.
Sam Houston State Sam Houston State is not on that list. So add them to the list. Again,
Sam
this will be
Houston
ever
too, yeah.
evolving. That's why there's a comment there about like email me for kind of the most up to date because like it's going to be an ever evolving list of schools that we have made connections with, and they understand kind of the mission of ROTC and HPSP.
For sure. Yeah. So exciting. Definitely check that out. And then moving into quickly that ADSO. So a lot of questions. A question I had early on was exactly what's the service commitment. If you're ROTC, that's like 4 years active. And then you have that individual ready reserve requirement, which is kind of like your name on a list somewhere, as often people describe it. Like you're not actively serving, but say we go to war, you can, of course, be drawn back in. And then, so this timeline, extremely helpful. You can check out the guide for yourself if it's hard to see, but it has just a super simple graphic, like med school, HPSP 4 years, residency 3 if it's a short residency. And then you have your 4 years of active service from ROTC requirement, and then 4 years from HPSP. I think in your War Docs podcast, you actually described it really well, how if you have a longer residency, your HPSP requirement is like 1 year minus the length of your residency, which I was like, why has no one explained it to me like this? This is amazing. Because say you're general surgery, feel free to explain a little more about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's just the aspect of it marches out how many years you're going to be spending in each zone, I guess you will, and then what you owe for the training that you receive. Again, these are just some examples, and truly, there's not a lot of people who fully understand the obligations, especially when they become longer and longer. I had to go sit at HRC in person. I'm stationed at Fort Knox, so I could go to HRC in person, sit down and look at my obligations because I had obligation from West Point. I had obligation from USU. I did a fellowship, so I had obligation for that. I signed a multi-year bonus or retention bonus. And so making sure that you have a full understanding of like what all of that counts and what is concurrent and what is consecutive. So concurrent means that it's going to be paid back at the same time. And then consecutive means that it's going to be paid back one after the other. And so I think we'll just use a very simple example, and then again, can get into nuances with individuals if they have more questions. But let's say that you did 4 years of medical school, you had done ROTC and had a 4-year contract. So you owe 4 years. You have 4 years in ROTC undergrad, 4 years in medical school. You go to let's say a short residency, you go to emergency medicine, right? And you did the HPSP program for your medical school. You'll do your 3-year residency, and then you're going to start paying back your health profession scholarship time, and then you're going to pay back your ROTC time after that. And so it is a consecutive obligation. If you got a degree from undergrad and you got a degree from medical school, you're not paying those back at the same time. And so I think that's important to understand. And again, getting into the nuances of it, I'm happy to do that like one-on-one for different conversations. And for people who aren't even in medical school yet, it's a lot to think about. So don't maybe overstress yourself in thinking about that obligation exactly to what year you would owe, because there are going to be other opportunities that come up. And I think a lot of us who had maybe a little bit longer obligation than maybe just the 4 years of HPSP, you get exposed to fellowships and other opportunities where you may want to sign up for more years, and that's going to add to your obligation. So I would just say don't stress too much early on about it. Just know that it is a consecutive obligation for both ROTC and doing the health profession scholarship program or going to USU.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great discussion of the difference of the concurrent versus consecutive, something that I've talked to some recruiters even in the past, like, some years they allow you to both serve your ROTC and HPSP time at the same time. I was like, do I trust that?
Yeah, it's hard to get. I mean, it's taken me a while, and I'm in it, right? Like I'm serving back my obligations right now, and it's still a lot to get through and understand. So
learning process for sure.
Yeah.
And then last thing is that the Army loves sending you to schools. And so the packet ends up with the graduate medical education and then different paths that you, as you promote, can end up being in the different domains of still clinical experience, operational, administrative. And so there's definitely paths up and out for a military career. You're definitely not pigeonholed in some weird black site offshore, but you get time with patients, you get time to pursue both what the Army deems valuable and what you deem valuable. And so this is, really great to have that graphic, because I could never develop something that complicated yet easy to read. So there you go, right there. Yeah. It's a great guide. Yeah, wow. So now I think I will pivot to some of the pre-med questions. So I had some fellow ROTC pre-med submit questions. And so the big one was this: what happens if you miss the MCAT score of 500 or section cutoffs of 124 plus in each section, but still get a med school acceptance?
Yeah. So the first gate is ed delay. And so that ed delay board, there are not firm cutoffs for the ed delay board. It says in the guide like 500, 124. But if you scored a 499, you should still submit. The HPSP scholarship does have a firm cutoff of 495. So you have to make at least a 495. And then you can apply for a waiver, but that is not guaranteed to get the HPSP scholarship. So if you're thinking about just the HPSP scholarship in general to pay for medical school, even if you get into a medical school, you have to have at least a 495, and then you have to have a very robust GPA if you have a low MCAT score, or vice versa, right? Like the GPA cutoff is 3.2, or you're going to have to get a criteria. If you have a low GPA and a low MCAT score, don't expect that to get approved. Now, again, you can always put it in, but you have to make sure that you're competitive, because we want physicians that are going to demonstrate the capacity to get through medical school, get through residency, continue on with further training. So if you have less than a 500, less than a 124, you still have to apply for ed delay, right? And get accepted through ed delay to be accepted to go to medical school immediately after completing your ROTC time. So, maybe the ed delay is the first no. And then it doesn't matter if you apply to medical schools at that point and get accepted, you didn't get approved for ed delay. And that's just the reality of it. So that's important to know. I would recommend, if you can retake the MCAT, if that makes sense, retake it. That's why, again, if you take it in March or April, you have some wiggle room to retake it potentially in the next month or two. But the later you take it, the more you put yourself at a disadvantage because of the rolling admissions process. Again, if you are in that position now, I'm happy to I've been having some one-on-one kind of coaching conversations with people about what the timelines look like. But ultimately, if you're ROTC and we're planning to do ed delay, you have to get through the ed delay board first and get selected. And there's not a firm cutoff. Anybody can submit to ed delay. But I don't know, I don't sit on that board, and I'm not sure what they're going to accept and what they're not. And so that packet includes a letter from your PMS, right? So you should be a strong ROTC cadet. It's going to include your activities. It's going to include your scores and your grades. But again, happy to have one-on-one conversation, because everybody's situation is always a little nuanced on what the path forward is. And if you didn't score what you expected, things can still work out, right? Like, you've done so much work, and so don't take this as no, you're never going to medical school. There are a lot of different ways you can get there, and don't discount yourself if you didn't get that mark.
Sure. And so, there's different paths, because some you can switch your active scholarship to the Guard. That was one kind of alternate plan I had of still being able to then apply to med school again and still serve in the Guard. And if that didn't work out, as I came later, I'm like, nope, you're on full active. We're going to send it. There's a lot of pressure. You have one chance to get accepted in med school. The nice thing is Carroll College has deals with 2 DO schools of guaranteed interviews for us who get above a 503 MCAT score and above a 3.6 GPA. I hit those thresholds, and so I'm guaranteed at the University of Incarnate Word and Touro in Great Falls. So that's a special thing. Your school might do the similar. I know Michigan State or the University of Michigan has a direct entry to med school where they don't have to take the MCAT if they score a certain threshold. So some programs have special exemptions that is good to look into. Not all students know that. Yeah. Thank you. That explains that well. It's tough. It's the reality, but it's tough. And then this other question was, can you ask her how applying for the HPSP would work for those who graduate in the fall instead of spring? Because I see the timeline, which is great for those who graduate in the spring and are on a normal timeline. But as you know, he was talking to me, he's like, but you and me are going to be graduating in the fall. So,
right. So the question is, how does it work for you for ed delay or for just
they say HPSP, but I believe everything like ed
for
delay,
HPSP. So the good thing about HPSP is, and Landon, you're in this situation where you just applied, put in your applications and you're going into kind of your final year. So the HPSP is actually and I don't think I have a graphic of this in the guide, but a way to think about it is the way that your priorities of work, right? Hopefully y'all know that if you've gone through CST and you've done infantry operations, priorities of work are going to include your AMCAS application should be the first thing, or ACOMAS, right? ACOMAS for DO school. So that is the first priority of work. Second priority of work is going to be your ed delay packet. because that has a time, a timeline of you need to be getting in August.
Like October
I would say
1st or August?
well, 20
August.
September is when the board meets, right? So it's even before that.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then third, start working with the medical recruiter for your HPSP, because we do a board each month starting in that fiscal year. So September, October is when we're going to start boarding people for the next year's scholarships. And that runs through the next September, October. You can actually be in medical school and still apply for HPSP to cover your whole 4 years. So don't worry about HPSP timeline of application, because it's not like Ed Delay where there's a one-time board. Like it's every single month we are selecting people for the HPSP scholarship from October to the next September for that year.
Got it.
Is that
Because
helpful?
Ed Delay needs to kick you out of that cohort for going active or guard or whatever you're commissioning.
Yes, you have to be selected for Ed Delay. Yeah. And you'll
that's
know, I think the timeline of when is pretty soon after that, because they'll release that, I think, within a month. You'll know if you got Ed Delay or not.
Okay, because it took a little over a month to get my extension of benefits from after the board met. I found that out end of June. And then the Ed Delay, it's just, I guess, the DA 591 and 591G that Captain Bells has to still finish for mine. He's currently on temporary leave, but we got to get rolling. But the good thing is he wanted to ensure my extension of benefits packet passed before we started the Ed Delay. So mine just had an extra hurdle. But hopefully you don't have to do an extension of benefits. That was something just because my R and my scholarship didn't approve the extra semester. So because I needed that extra 4.5, so that 0.5, I needed that. But just to clarify. Great. And then the last question then was, is it okay to take a gap year if I don't score well in the MCAT with the HPSP? And I noted page 26 in this guide.
Yeah. Right. And so if you don't do as well in the MCAT as you thought you would, and it just doesn't really work out, what you can do is you can commission. So there's no like formal gap year program right now that exists in ROTC, like that's acknowledged. We're working on some of those options, but that is something that's not materialized yet. So maybe 6 months from now, I'll have a better understanding of, be able to express, because like some of the ideas that are out there, can you do Gold Bar Recruiter for a year? Can you do some of these programs that already exist and kind of use that as a gap year, and then go to medical school the next year. So I think the most realistic thing right now is to go reserves, and to then you have to ask for release from reserves if you get accepted into medical school. And again, I'm working on clarifying that and being able to have a process map for what that looks like for people, because once you commission, you don't belong to Cadet Command anymore. You belong to the Army Reserves, and they're the ones who have to now process paperwork for you to, if you're going to take on the HPSP scholarship. Again, you're in a different category. And so you can't be a reserve officer and an HPSP recipient, because the HPSP, you go into this kind of weird world of where you are both you're inactive reserve, but you're active 45 days out of each year. Again, it's its own little component, has its own little branch at Human Resources Command. Thankfully, I know the officer is taking over that, used to be our S3. And so he's really helpful. But again, you have to be released from the reserves in order to go to medical school. And so that now falls out of the hand of Cadet Command and would go to the reserves.
Got it. Yeah. So it is a possibility. Some made it sound like when you're in the reserves, like you're locked there till your service is
I mean,
up.
I think it is dependent on people approving, right? Yeah, it's going to be dependent on people approving it, and maybe even depending on what branch you are in the reserves. I do know that like when I was going through the whole process, I had friends who went from the academy into a regular Army branch, and some of those branches were not willing to release people at that time. Now, I think it's different right now with the Army G1 analysis and saying we need physicians. I think the branch chiefs at Human Resources Command are more likely to sign off on a conditional release to let people go to medical school from active duty, but that's not always been the case. And so you just, again, you're kind of putting yourself out there when you're dependent on certain people to approve certain things. But again, people are welcome to reach out to me and ask questions, and can hopefully find some connections for them of people to talk to. And even if you're active duty and listening to this and you're wanting to go to medical school, I've worked with a few different branch managers, assignment managers at Human Resources Command, because it's a paperwork aspect of getting all that through and making sure your timelines align.
I think we mentioned this before we started recording, but you mentioned that you can get some med schools to delay that secondary deadline if they're at CST and they're just inaccessible. Is that
Yeah,
true?
so I believe that USU has a 2 week turnaround, right? So they're going to send you a secondary and you have 2 weeks to turn that around. And that helps them determine like who's serious about wanting to go here, you know? And so I wrote some memorandums for record for a cadet who was in First Regiment CST, submitted his application 28 May into AMCAS. And I emailed those deans of admission or admissions committees asking to extend that. Come to find out, a lot of those schools did not end up having that tight of a deadline, but there are some schools that do. So if you identify those schools that have a tight secondary turnaround and you're at CST, you know, we're happy to help, you know, advocate for you to have a little bit longer time to submit that. So you're not kind of like kicked out of you're not doing it after the fact, like, oh, sorry, I was at CST. Like you're being proactive in that communication.
There was one cadet who was applying for her secondaries the day after getting out of CST. We're at her internship. She pulls out her laptop, is like frantically writing to meet those deadlines.
Yeah.
It's good to know, like, if you're a cadet about to go CST, you just submitted your AMCAS. I guess this year it's a little bit late, but yeah, if you don't happen to get in one of your preferred regiments, which your PMS, your HRA should be able to help you secure that early spot. You suggested probably like Reg 1, 2, ideally.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you're going to have to look at the release dates because I think this year, like you really, or you had to have somebody else submit it for you, you know, like on you're traveling, like the day it opens, you know, again, or second reg meets, you know, it's like a week later that they show up. And so, but you got to have all your stuff together and ready to go. So that's why the backwards planning is so important. And like you said, it can be overwhelming. This is a ton of information. It's a 30-page guide. Consume it in little bits of pieces, have some good mentors, have a health advisor or a faculty member or somebody to walk you through. Also, you know, just to help you with the expectation management for breaking this down and making your dream a reality.
Yeah. Anyone feeling overwhelmed, take a deep breath.
Yeah. Take a breath.
Into chunks.
Take a breath. Right. Yep. You can do what you can do today, but you know there are ways to set yourself up for success over your journey in ROTC and into medical school.
Yeah, thank you. And the last major question I have is, what kind of legacy do you want this guide to have?
I would love for any ROTC cadet who wants to go to medical school to get in. I mean, the West Point boasts, I mean, this year they had every single cadet got accepted to a medical school. And I would love for that to be the case for ROTC, that there are opportunities and it's viewed as a great thing to want to go pre-med through ROTC. For those people who really know they want to serve as a military physician, like I did when I was 17, I want there to be confidence out there that you can do ROTC and still get into medical school. So hopefully that guide is the first step to that. Education and knowledge amongst the PMSs and the RUs is also going to help with that. And then, you know, making sure that people are just aware of the opportunities that exist out there through Health Profession Scholarship Program to pay for medical school too. Because it's all really expensive if you're doing it without them.
And chain. Wow. I love that mission. That's great to have that legacy of being able to meet that West Point standard that they just set for themselves. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, anything final that you'd like to add for the good of the audience?
Yeah, if you've listened to this episode and you're interested, I'm going to plug the War Docs podcast is a great place to get some inspiration for what your life could look like. We do go through HPSP for Army, Navy, and Air Force in a recent episode there. There's a great episode from May of 2024 with a HPSP student, Ryan Leone. And I think, you know, hearing stories and learning how to craft your story is going to be the best way for you to continue along this journey because stories provide inspiration, they provide motivation, and then you're going to have to learn to tell your own story in your application to tell these medical schools why they should select you to come in and be the future of America's healthcare.
And on that note, in this video, we covered the full roadmap for ROTC cadets and other pre-meds to apply and get into medical school, from your first PT session as a freshman all the way to that final interview your senior year. But for obvious reasons, the pre-medical path is still extremely challenging and arduous. And so if you want to be like those 23,156 students in 2024 that got accepted and learn to craft that story that Dr. Noel just mentioned, then click on this video where I break down that all. Make each heartbeat count.